Secretary-Treasurer of National Nurses United.
The Healthy California campaign is going to be in every district, 80 assembly districts in California, to knock on every door in those districts to talk to people about guaranteeing health care to everyone in California. What nurses in California, what California Nurses Associations want, and what the Healthy California campaign wants is for the bill to be released early next year at the first opportunity in the legislature and move forward so that we can guarantee health care for all Californians.
Democrats have big majorities in the California state legislature, and Democrat Jerry Brown is governor. So if the Democratic Party supports Medicare for all, guaranteed health care, they could make it happen in California. But California Assembly Speaker Rendon is blocking it. Cool says, though, that the people of California have the power to make this happen.
People in our community are aware that our Democratic legislature is holding up the right to health care in California. We need them to understand that this is possible and that we need them to get involved in the campaign and to understand the idea that they have a right to health care and that there is a way to get there.
IBEW Local 98 says it's preparing to file suit against drug companies joining litigation against opioid makers. IBEW Local 98 business manager John Doherty says that IBEW Local 98 will no longer allow the manufacturers and marketers of these deadly drugs to peddle their poison to our members without facing severe consequences. He says he's seen too many IBEW members lose their lives to opioids. Doherty says that opioid addiction is a national epidemic, and Big Pharma has to be held accountable as opioid manufacturers and marketers. WIN is America's multimedia news voice for workers.
These kind of gazillionaires, they don't want regular folks to have a voice. And they don't want teachers to have a voice. They don't want workers to have a voice.
Support WIN's worker news mission at workersindependentnews.com.
Let's get America working. We must build, maintain, and repair our nation's crumbling infrastructure. Teamsters support a bipartisan approach to creating good jobs for American workers. Learn more at letsgetamericaworking.com. Teamsters strong, America stronger.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. It's, well, tax time. Evidently, listening to the Donald, it's going to be great. It's going to be tremendous. It's going to be huge. And, you know, maybe for the folks in his country clubs, it's going to be not so much for the rest of us, and we'll get to that. But first, and it's about time, and this isn't one of those things that now I'm going to say you give Trump credit, because had he done it a week or so ago, then you go, look, he was presidential, you know, the administration's working. Outside of the rhetoric of how wonderful FEMA is and how wonderful the federal response has been, and how, look, understand that the people of Mexico are not going to bash The politicians in Mexico are not going to bash the Trump administration for its slow reaction to helping the people of Puerto Rico. They're not going to do it because they understand this guy's thin-skinned. If they don't kiss his ring, if they don't kiss the behind, if they don't do all that, nothing will come because they understand he is that punitive, he is that petulant, he is that thin-skinned. So whenever he says, the people of Mexico, the mayor and the governor, and they think I'm wonderful. They have to. They're really in kind of a hostage situation because the country is screwed. The entire state, the entire island is screwed. And again, you don't really know that the president understands that that's U.S. territory and that, they're citizens. So evidently the president has now ordered a waiver to the Jones Act, which I argued should have happened, a week ago. If you look at what happened in Florida, when Florida was starving for gasoline because of Harvey, it was waived almost immediately. And, I look at this, what's taken so long? Now, it's going to go into effect for 10 days. And what the Jones Act is, it says, look, if you're going to ship things to Puerto Rico between two U.S. ports, be that, Hawaii as well. If you're going to ship between U.S. ports, you've got to bring it into the U.S. It's got to be put on a U.S. ship under a U.S. flag with U.S. crew, and it's got to be shipped back and forth. And I agree with that in normal times. Absolutely agree with it. Just like I agree that there shouldn't be cross-border trucking, that from Mexico or Canada, when things come into the U.S., they should be put onto U.S. trucks, people who follow U.S. laws. Absolutely, there's no question in my mind that's how it should be. But in times of emergency, in times of crisis, like right now, like when you see the satellites that NASA has looking down on Puerto Rico, you don't see anything. It's completely dark. And the rest of the world is going, hey, we're willing to help you. Let us help. I, for one, say, let them. This is part of that back and forth. And I look at, do you remember a number of years ago, I guess it's probably been about 10 years now, when a Russian submarine was in real distress. And the only vessel in the area that could save those Russian sailors was an American ship. And the Russians said, nope, no thanks. We're going to let them die. Because they didn't, one, I would argue they didn't want us on their ships to find out what they've got. But two, they didn't want the help. Is that who and how we are? And I would argue no. So, about damn time the administration did their job. And hopefully this will help aid and ease the pain and suffering in that country. And hopefully we will, as quickly as we did for Houston and in Florida and Louisiana and other places recently, as quickly as we get resources there, we will do that here as well. So our thoughts, our prayers, our hopes, all of that go out to the folks there. Now, on the other side, just under the heading of just can't let it go. This is a day when, today should be Trump's big day. This should be baby's big day out. The tax plan has been slapped on the table. Lots of rhetoric, lots of talking heads are going to be able to go out and say how wonderful it's going to be for the working class of this country. I say bollocks. I say nonsense. I say malarkey. I say I've seen this movie. Can we get something else? But on the day when it's supposed to be about his wonderful, tremendous, huge tax cuts for the working class and the middle class, he again has to go off on the NFL players and the kneeling. Evidently, he did an interview yesterday for Fox and Friends that I guess is airing today. And what is it with him only doing interviews with Fox and Friends? He goes on, talking about his great relationships with all of these NFL owners and how all of these owners are afraid of their players. And I'm going, really? He goes, it's disgraceful. They're all afraid. And, they've got to be tough and they've got to be smart, but they're afraid. And then I'm going, how is it possible that these billionaire owners who own these players are afraid of them? How is that possible? And the only thing I can come up with is it's playing into that frame of, look, they're 75% of the workforce in the NFL is black. So are the really rich white owners, are they afraid of the less rich black players? That's the frame. And it's bizarre, but it's going to feed the base. It's going to feed the red meat. And you're going to get idiots like the guy out in Pittsburgh who's going to paint a swastika on the Steelers flag. And just crazy. I mean, we're living through really bizarre times. It just is what it is. But let's get to the tax cuts. Look, the reality is we know what it is. Tax cuts for millionaires, tax cuts for big corporations, not going to trickle down. Sorry. I know we've heard this. I know we wish and we hope. And there's that old saying, wish in one hand, something else in the other. See which one fills up first. This is a whole lot of the other hand. There's not much wishing there. It's a whole lot of the steaming pile that would fill up the other hand. And we know this. And again, we just kind of, I don't know. I don't get how we keep falling for the same rhetoric. You had Louisiana Senator John Kennedy, who said, if we do it right, giant if, then the economy will be stimulated appropriately, and tax revenues will go up and deficits won't increase. He says, now, I can't prove to you that will happen, but neither can anyone else. I can prove to you how we cut taxes and our debts go up, tax revenues go down, investments go down, and, debt goes up. I got about $20 trillion ago that we could point to, because you go back to the Reagan era, we were less than $1 trillion in the hole. And what we saw come out of the Reagan era was massive deficits, huge handouts, and the creation of the largest wealth class in the history of civilization. And thanks to our tax code, thanks to busting unions, what's happened is, and the Forbes, and I don't know that Forbes meant to do this, but the Forbes 400 is really a great tool in looking at how our tax code has benefited the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, the top 400 among us. From 1982, when the list came out, until 2011, those folks on that 400 list saw their wealth increase by 612%. Whereas the average working person barely made double digits. So you go, wait a second here. There's this little imbalance. 612% to barely 10. Whoa. Somebody's not sharing. And it comes back to our tax code. It's insane. It's crazy. It's nuts. And even you've got the Wall Street Journal who's saying, after months of secret negotiation, the Trump administration and congressional leaders have come up with a tax plan, sort of. I'm sorry, this is the New York Times. Sort of. What they have come up with really is a wish list of tax cuts for the wealthy, with lots of, we'll get back to you on that promises, where the details are supposed to be. The Wall Street Journal points out, overall, the GOP has produced a tax reform outline. It's an outline, not really a plan. It's an outline that can revitalize a weak economic expansion, lead to more new business creation, enhance worker productivity, and lift wages. Show me when. I mean, honestly, show me when that's actually happened. And the sad reality is, in the end, we've seen this movie before. We've seen it again and again and again. And in every case, beyond exception, beyond possible exception, working people lose. And the reality is we've bitten off our collective noses time and time again. And it generally comes down to one thing. And this is where we're going to leave this for now. It comes down to one thing. And I love this mentality, this frame, because it's so true. And I've talked to so many people who, have this kind of thought process, which is basically, I'm okay getting screwed just as long as the guy behind me gets screwed more. I'm okay with not getting tax breaks. I'm okay with staying on the treadmill and barely keeping up, just as long as that welfare mother doesn't get more food stamps. Or, that lazy person, that parasite. We hear that nonsense all the time. Basically what it comes down to. So we're going to talk a bunch about that. And lots to get to. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Quick break. Right back.
There's a flaw in the system, and the fly in the ointment is going to bring the whole thing down. The floodgates are open. We've let the demons loose. The big guns have spoken, and we've fallen for the ruse.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Would you be willing to stand up in solidarity with your fellow workers, even if it cost you your job? Well, on this day in labor history, the workers at Mersey Docks and Harbour Company in Liverpool, England, answered that question. The year was 1995. 329 Mersey dock workers refused to cross a picket line that was being walked against another company on the docks. The workers at Torside had been fired for protesting against erosions in job security and increasingly unpredictable scheduling. They were speaking out against the casualization of their labor. When the Mersey dock workers would not cross the Torside picket line, they too were fired. Dock workers across the world stood up in solidarity with the Mersey workers against this unjust treatment. They knew if it could happen in Liverpool, it might happen anywhere. Pickets sprung up from Norway to Japan, from Australia to Italy, and into the United States. It was a global outpouring of solidarity. The strike wore on for 850 days. 1 year into the strike, dock workers held an international day of action in support of the Liverpool workers. Finally, 2.5 years after they were fired, the dock workers agreed to a settlement. They did not get their jobs back, but they did get severance pay. A film was made about the struggle. The proceeds were used to purchase a bar in Liverpool. It is known as the Dockers Pub and has become a space for working class organizing. The International Dock Workers Council was also born from this strike. Today, the council has 90,000 members, a lasting movement of solidarity. 20 years after the strike, dock workers from across the world gathered in Liverpool to remember the struggle. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Disorder in the house. There's a flaw in the system, and the fly in the ointment is going to bring the whole thing down.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. TheRickSmithShow.com. So, we've seen a lot of, especially around the NFL protests, a lot of this veiled racism, a lot of the dog whistle, a lot of the Republicans being who they are. And I hate to put it in that kind of a blunt term, but it's, you look at what the party has pursued over the last, 10, 20 years, the groups that they associate with and the dog whistle that they use, and I can only come back to that conclusion. So when I saw this article over at Media Matters for America, 23 Reasons Why the NRA is Racist, I said, this is something absolutely got to talk about, which is why we've asked Timothy Johnson to come talk with us. He's the director of the Guns and Public Safety Program there at Media Matters for America. Timothy, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. Thanks for having me on.
So, how do you come to this premise that the NRA, an organization with a long storied history, how do you come to the racist conclusion?
Right, so I'll tell you why we wrote this article. So the NRA is a magazine, and the head of the NRA, Wayne LaPierre, put out an article yesterday complaining that media outlets have apparently been calling the NRA racist. And he has an article arguing that that's not the case, and that really stood out to us because, as we know, the NRA has been involved in numerous racial controversies. So we decided to put out a list, non-exhaustive, 23 reasons why the NRA is racist in response. And it starts actually with comments that LaPierre himself has made.
And walk me through some of it.
Right, yeah. So in 2015, as the 2016 presidential election was gearing up, Wayne LaPierre appeared at the annual meeting for the NRA, and he said 8 years of one demographically symbolic president is enough, referencing, Barack Obama, the first black president. And, what he was doing is basically signaling the NRA's preference for a white male president. And you were talking about dog whistles a second ago. Actually, a lot of people said that LaPierre traded his dog whistle for an air horn. That's what Leonard Pitts, Pulitzer-winning columnist, said in response to LaPierre's comments. So there's just numerous examples out there. We do a lot of monitoring of the NRA's media outlet, and they have recently hired some people who have histories of racism. So, it's really out there, their media outlet, their leadership, members of their board, and then the organization as a whole has also taken some racist actions.
So let me ask you this, because, this is front and center in a lot of people's minds. You throw the word racist out there, and a lot of people automatically put white supremacists and then throw in all of the Nazi stuff that's going on. Are we talking about the same kind of people? When you use the word racist, what exactly are we going at?
Well, I think these are just, basically denigrating minorities on the basis of their race. I mean, I think some of the more clear examples in the item, you have Ted Nugent, who's an NRA board member, longstanding member, was reelected in 2016. He wrote a column last year in praise of using the N-word, including as a racial slur. And this draws no rebuke from the NRA. We've asked them several times when Nugent makes racist comments, and they'll never respond, and they never rebuke him. So I think it kind of doesn't get more clear-cut than that, just, bias on the basis of race.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. I don't know why you would put someone like Ted Nugent on your board. I just, immediately, there's no way I can be part of an organization that would do that.
Right. I mean, he's almost their de facto spokesperson because, he's the most well-known person on the board, I would say. When he's up for re-election, he gets the most votes. And actually, in 2016, when he was reelected, it was just months after he had made just a series of really horrible anti-Semitic comments. So, racism, anti-Semitism, the NRA leadership, LaPierre, others will not rebuke it. I guess, they're fine with it.
The reason I bring that up is because, look, one of the things that's scary to me is what we're seeing is this almost acceptance of this white nationalist movement, these fascists, if you will, Nazis, whatever words you want to label, you want to put to them. What worries me is that these people are really well armed, and I've had this conversation about 15 years ago that the left had better figure out how to buy guns, because the right is really well armed, and they have this kind of rhetoric, which kind of scares me.
Well, yeah, I don't know if an arms race is the solution, but yeah, we're seeing it from the NRA, which is disturbing because I think a lot of people have said that it's kind of an extreme organization for years now. But so their media outlet, it used to be called NRA News. And we monitor it, and it was typically a lot of misinformation about gun violence, not a lot of really inflammatory stuff. Last October, they rebranded as NRA TV, and it totally changed. It's almost like a alt-right thing now. One segment that we highlighted for this article we put out is that they had a segment where they fear-mongered that Black Lives Matter was poised to start mass killing white people in America.
And the thing that gets me is that people, the simple, the dim among us, they internalize that stuff and they believe it.
Right, it's scary. I mean, the NRA was also really criticized for that ad, earlier this year where they said that they had to use, people should use the clenched fist of truth to confront people who oppose Trump. And, a lot of people who who wrote about that ad said it was getting close to inciting violence. So, rhetoric can have consequences, and the NRA, certainly to a greater extent right now, as opposed to even a couple of years ago, is really playing with fire, and it is scary.
So, when did the NRA lose its mind? Because, look, I remember back in when I was a kid in the 80s, they were, late 70s, early 80s, they were the people who taught you not to shoot each other, not that when you pick up a gun, hand it to someone. They had classes, and they weren't insane.
Yeah, so the big change happened in the 70s where it changed from, kind of a sportsman organization to more of a political organization. And then from that point on, I think you're just getting more and more extreme. I think they have to keep, pushing, the window to one side because, basically, we already have very permissive gun laws in the United States. They need to just keep pushing it, so you have to get more and more extreme as time goes on. And so I think it's just something that's been kind of slowly happening, for I guess decades at this point. But it seems like they've really been emboldened by Trump with how they've rebranded their media outlet to be so extreme.
No, I mean it's absolutely crazy. But here's the thing: I mean, we do have a problem with gun violence in this country, and I don't think they're helping this.
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, the proposals that they have, right now they're trying to get silencers deregulated in Congress, and also they're trying to loosen up concealed carry rules around the country. So, I mean, what the best research shows is basically when you have more gun availability, you're going to have more gun violence. So, the NRA's agenda is to loosen all gun laws. So then, yeah, you have more violence as a result.
So what's the rationale for silencers? Look, I think you can make a cogent argument of why maybe somebody might want to carry a concealed weapon. I guess you could make an argument, but a silencer, I mean, to me, maybe I've just watched too many Law and Orders or too many crime shows. Those are really only used to kill people silently.
Right. So I think, the real reason they're pushing it's a marketing thing, because they want gun manufacturers to sell more products, but they frame it as a health thing that basically by lowering the decibel that you improve ear health. The thing is a silencer doesn't lower a gun so much that you can't shoot it without earplugs anyways. So, the rationale doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Right now these things are highly regulated. The law seems to be working, but I think the actual motivation is a profit motive.
Look, if you're shooting a gun so often that it's going to make you deaf, maybe you should invest in a pair of headphones.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just a total pretext.
Wow. I look at this and I can only come back to how insane our political process has become. I mean, as the Republicans and look, the NRA and the Republican Party are tied at the hip. There's no question about that. I haven't seen the NRA come out and support many Democrats, and there are a lot of very pro-gun Democrats. I mean, Bob Casey here in Pennsylvania is one of them.
Yeah, they actually used to do that. They would support a Democrat if a Democrat would go along with their agenda. But yeah, that seems to be no longer the case. They really are tied to the Republican Party. What you said about the political process, I mean, maybe like 90% of Americans favor having a background check on all gun sales, but it can't get through Congress. I think, that just kind of sums up how ridiculous it is.
I mean, we can't seem to just do common sense things. And look, I've said before, I grew up in a housing project as a kid. When you saw somebody walking down the street with a gun, somebody was going to die. I now live in a neighborhood where if you see a neighbor, walking down the street with a gun, they're probably going to the free gun range down the road. There's got to be a way that common sense, there's got to be a way that policymakers can take both of those scenarios and make sane regulation so that maybe we protect those people in the inner city and not infringe on the rights of people in more rural areas to engage in their sport. But, we've lost that bit of nuance. We've lost, the nuanced thinking. We've lost common sense.
Well, yeah, a lot of it, the NRA is lying to people because you have something like a background check law, and NRA will tell people that it's actually going to disarm people. So we can't even have an honest conversation about something that's just very sensible. I think in the long run that's kind of untenable for something so unpopular to never be enacted, but I think it's going to end up taking much longer than it should.
Let me ask you the other part of this, because, I see some of my gun nut friends who are saying, Chicago, 40,000 people in a weekend are being shot. Is there an answer to that problem?
Well, I think you kind of have to have national gun laws because, people say, well, Chicago has, strict gun laws, but, high rates of gun violence. But the thing is, there's nothing really stopping people from bringing in guns, from other parts of Illinois that have less restrictive laws, or, states like Indiana, which are very close. I think, state laws addressing gun violence are great and, can work on the margins. But I think to truly start shifting this problem in a really big way, you're going to have some type of a, national common sense law that tightens things up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I got to be honest. After Tuesday's election, I'm even more freaked out because you've got a who I would label a theocrat who's probably going to be senator from Alabama, who dressed up like a little cowboy with a little pea shooter gun, and I'm going, this is nuts.
Yeah, what's interesting about that race is the NRA actually endorsed Strange, but if you look at Moore versus Strange, they're both so far out there on the gun issue that I think didn't really matter. NRA, if you look at their endorsements, they like to kind of play it safe so they can, look like they have a big, win margin. So I think they probably just picked the incumbent in this case, and they just kind of guessed wrong. But yeah, I'm sure, Moore will do, whatever the NRA wants.
Yeah. Last question I've got for you, because look, I know a number of NRA members, and they don't appear to me outwardly to be insane. Is there a way for the membership, because we're told it's a member-driven organization, is there a way for the membership, do you think, to pull them somewhere back to sanity, or are they just so deeply ingrained and so deeply in bed with the gun industry that it's kind of hopeless?
Well, yeah, their voting rules for, board elections, things like that, are actually really against, your average member. So that's going to be difficult, but I think, just raising awareness about what the organization is about, because, I think definitely, the comments, the racism that we documented in this piece doesn't represent, your average NRA member. So, yeah, I think there is a gulf. I think people, just need to become more aware.
Yeah, there you go. Timothy, I appreciate the time. Great piece.
All right, thank you.
Good stuff. You can take a look at it. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com of how you can see the 23 reasons why the NRA is racist, written by Timothy Johnson over at Media Matters for America. Going to take a quick break. Right back. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425.
We're on the road to nowhere. We're on the road to nowhere. We're on the road to nowhere.
Bringing sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
Newsflash. Republican congressional leaders have come up with yet another grand scheme to fix America's healthcare system. So look out, because when they say fix, they mean it in the same sense your veterinarian uses the word. For the gazillionth time, GOP lawmakers have put a shiny new ribbon on their same old ugly package of health insurance deforms. As before, this latest plan would eliminate coverage for millions of Americans, raise the price of insurance for the middle class, and deliver much less care. But one guy says he loves it. A great bill, tweeted Donald Trump. I'm guessing that, once again, our Twitterer-in-chief hasn't actually read the bill he's praising, or even scanned the factual summary of what it does. But he might want to hear the opinions of his fellow corporate chieftains, who have read every word of it. For example, the CEO of Blue Cross Blue Shield flatly rejects the rewrite because it, quote, would allow states to waive key consumer protections and undermine safeguards for those with pre-existing conditions. Also, he points out that the plan would increase uncertainty in the marketplace, making coverage more expensive and jeopardizing Americans' choice of health plans. Or Trump could ponder the conclusion of a health policy expert. The bill is, quote, just basically injecting chaos in 50 state capitals for the next 2 years. Or maybe he would value a state health executive's perspective. Quote, the bill's cuts would be devastating to Alaska's healthcare system, and patients will bear the consequences through reduced access to health care and lost insurance coverage. This is Jim Hightower saying Trump and the GOP are wasting Congress's time and what little public credibility they have left by continuing to play partisan politics with people's health. There's nothing great about that.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
These are words you should tell the truth. Your life and the proof. Where you gonna run to? Where you gonna hide? You're running for the door now. No one's getting out alive.
Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check the website, thericksmithshow.com. Remember Spice Boy? Evidently got a new gig. Remember we talked about that about a week and a half ago. He got a gig as doing the speaking tour. He's going to go out and give high-priced speeches on his extensive knowledge of telling the truth, or how to lie with a straight face. Whichever direction you want to go with that. Evidently, Spice Boy is in Pennsylvania today, giving a speech sponsored by Range Resources. The fracking people. The headline is Making America Energy Independent, which I'm all in favor of. I would just prefer to do it in a much different way, but Spice Boy's around. Evidently, they say he's going to be the closing keynote speaker, going to provide an inside perspective of Donald Trump, which good luck on that, by the way. But going to provide that insight into the Trump administration and the policy plans regarding U.S. energy. Because, look, it's a revolution. Not to mention newfound wealth. Gas, drill, baby, drill. Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, that's it. They say Spicer's going to touch upon how we are poised to strengthen our nation's geopolitical position, which, look, when I want to know about foreign policy, Spice Boy's the first guy I go to. Create manufacturing opportunities here at home and jobs for all Americans while continuing to protect our environment. Yeah. Yes. They write, as a former advisor to the president and the White House press secretary, his address will provide insight in how the U.S. plans to play an even bigger role in the global oil and gas ecosystem, spur billions of dollars in construction projects, open shale exploration on federal lands, and reduce stifling regulations, particularly to pipelines. Lastly, they say Mr. Spicer will share his communications expertise. Were you watching the same couple of months where he was press secretary? I got to be honest, communication expertise is really a stretch. I mean, honestly, it's way out there. And other experience garnered from his post at the White House to address industry concerns and approaches to minimizing sensationalized public protests. Spice Boy is going to teach you how to tap down those protesters, make them stand up from kneeling. They go on to say that minimize the sensationalized public protests reported by the media and globally with regards to preventing foreign oil-producing countries and cartels from holding Americans hostage. That's going on. Again, good for him. Needs a job. If the oil and gas people want to spend, if I remember right, the minimum for his speech is $40,000. I gotta be honest, a bit outrageous. Considering the fact that he was really a horrible press secretary. I mean, not good in any way, shape, or form. And yet, this is the problem with our political system. That you go in, you do a bad job, and somehow somebody wants to hear you speak. Just because you were in the administration, now you're going to make huge money. And this is the problem with that swinging door. And it's always been my problem with how this marriage between government and corporate interest, this kind of wink and nod fascism that's going on. this kind of blending where you don't know where we the people start or where corporate interests end or where they come together. It's just we know that a handful of people do really, really well. And again, it's just not Republicans. It's Democrats too. It's the entire cesspool. And this is part of what gets people really riled up and angry about when they see things happen in government. Look, I was just as angry to see a lot of the Democrats, flee out of the Obama administration to do the same thing. This is the kind of stuff that ticks people off. I want boring government. I want bureaucrats who are going to do their jobs, not hang around for a couple of years and go, oh, hey, we can make a ton of money in the private sector. All we have to do is, what the corporate interests want. I mean, that's the thing that's really very frustrating to me. And, the sad reality is we are so divided. And look, I remember a time where, and I'm not a gun nut, but the NRA seemed rational at a certain point. Now, granted, I was much, much younger. And if you remember, George H.W. Bush actually left as a lifelong member of the NRA because he said they were a bunch of jackbooted thugs. Now, you're going back into the 80s for this. This is how long this march to the extreme by groups like the NRA have gone on. And it comes back to the money. The NRA is, and I used to believe they were a wholly owned subsidiary of the gun industry. From what people are telling me, they basically own the gun industry. They keep the gun industry hostage, which is kind of twisted. Now you've got it's really kind of twisted. Lots of really just mind-blowing kind of insanity. And, Timothy Johnson pointed out we don't need an arms race, and I'm with him on this. But I've said for years, the fringe, the preppers, the extreme, the dim among us are very well armed. The paranoid, all of the people who should not have guns have arsenals. And we as a country have, not even just allowed it, we've encouraged it. During the Obama years, the gun industry was never happier. I'm kind of, there's part of me that waits for the NRA to go, hey, liberals, better be afraid that crazy Tea Party flag waving idiot that lives down the road. He's gonna come and shoot you. You better buy a gun. I'm waiting for that ad campaign to come out. Crazy, crazy times. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, talk media news. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Oh, what distance can you stand it? Oh, tell me how you can. Will you be a lousy scab or will you be a man? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1904. A woman was arrested for smoking a cigarette in a car on Fifth Avenue in New York City. While women in the United States are no longer likely to be arrested for smoking cigarettes in public, they continue to face unequal treatment in the labor force. When women started working in factories in the mid-1800s, most notably textile mills, owners paid them far less than men for similar labor. In fact, it was because they saw women as a cheap labor pool that many textile factory owners favored female workers. Today, a woman will earn about 80 cents for every dollar a man earns. Even though women have increased their presence in higher paying jobs traditionally dominated by men, women as a whole continue to work in low paying occupations. Women are about twice as likely as men to say that they've been discriminated against at work because of their gender. In January of 2009, President Barack Obama signed into law the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. It was named after a woman who fought for 10 years against gender pay discrimination at the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. She was awarded a $3 million jury settlement, but that ruling was later overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. The 2009 Act strengthened women's ability to seek legal recourse over pay discrimination. Still, today, the rate of women's compensation lags behind that of men. Labor unions must continue to play a role in fighting against pay inequity.
This union maid was wise to the tricks of the company spies. She'd never be fooled by a company stool. She'd always organize the guys. She'd always get her way. When she asked for better pay, she'd show her.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryint.com.
Oh, you can't scare me. I'm sticking to the union.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. The French government is condemning new travel restrictions imposed by President Trump over the weekend that are known as Travel Ban 3.0. The ban now imposes strict travel restrictions on citizens of Chad, a landlocked nation in Africa's Sahara Desert. France's Foreign Ministry spokesperson said Wednesday that the decision to include Chad came as a surprise, and she called on the U.S. to reverse its decision. The rationale behind including Chad on the travel ban has baffled security experts who note that the country is one of America's top counter-terror allies. France has some 4,000 troops deployed to a base in Chad, while the U.S. operates a secretive drone base in the capital in N'Djamena. A terrorism report by the State Department earlier this year noted that terror attacks in Chad committed by Boko Haram fell dramatically in 2016, thanks in large part to an increased proactive security force presence by the government of Chad. The report also praised Chad's immigration authorities for imposing tough border checks to prevent terrorists from entering the country. And the European Union is proposing a new refugee resettlement program to take refugees directly from northern Africa into Europe. Some 50,000 refugees could be covered by the proposal, which aims to avoid the dangers associated with crossing the central Mediterranean by boat. It's a journey that's claimed thousands of lives in recent years. The plan also aims to thwart human smugglers who charge high prices to ferry refugees to Europe. While the EU's new plan has noble ambitions, the track record of previous refugee resettlement efforts shows how difficult implementation could be. 2 years ago, EU states agreed to resettle some 160,000 refugees who'd flocked to Italy and Greece, but as of this month, just 29,000 have been resettled. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Russian trolls out there, stirring up trouble. Evidently, over the weekend, you had some Russian trolls who were on both sides of the take a knee debate, just trying to stir you-know-what up. And again, are we surprised by this? My favorite one was the Boston Antifa group who evidently forgot to turn off their geolocator, which put them somewhere in Russia. I'm not even going to try and butcher the name. But somewhere in Russia, there was the Boston Antifa, which, I think it's Vladivostok is the name, which is evidently Russian for Boston. There you go. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world and in Washington, D.C. Ellen Ratner, Talk Media News. Ellen, thanks for taking time for us.
You had Victoria yesterday. You have me today.
I'm sorry. How are you this morning, Alan?
I am doing okay. A couple interesting pieces of news from this morning, which is that the Playboy founder, Hugh Hefner, died. He was 91 years old. He was living at the Playboy Mansion, even though he had sold it a year ago. He was allowed to live there till his death. Now, it's interesting, those of us in the feminist movement back then criticized him, but the fact is that he did allow sexuality to be actually openly discussed. He will be buried in a box or in a drawer next to Marilyn Monroe, who he also popularized.
Should he be allowed to go to heaven? I mean, after the life that he led?
He claimed he slept with over 1,000 women.
I know. I mean, should he be allowed to go to heaven?
I don't know. I don't have anything to do with heaven.
I'm just joking. But today, the big day, taxes.
That's
everyone's
right.
getting a tax
the
cut.
problem is we don't yet have a bill. And although it has been very criticized by various groups, some of the right-wing groups such as the Wall Street Journal, New York Post, etc., are pro the tax plan. However, again, we do not know what's actually going to be in it. And it's very interesting. The Progressive Policy Institute put out something saying, hey, the Republicans have a plan, where's the Democrats' plan? Democrats can't be criticizing unless they have a plan. Now, yesterday, the Democrats had a hearing themselves because they weren't allowed into the Republican hearing about the tax plan. But again, we haven't seen a bill, so we don't know exactly what's in it.
Yeah, well, here I got a tax plan. Let's just go back to the good socialist Republican President Dwight David Eisenhower's tax plan.
Well, a lot of people paid a lot more money under his tax plan, and America was very prosperous.
Yeah, and we built infrastructure. We didn't have $20 trillion in debt. We didn't have kids saddled with a lifetime of debt because they had the audacity to want to go to college. It seemed, and look, I'm not an economist, but it seems to me that we've created the largest billionaire class in the history of the civilized world, and it hasn't really done very well for us.
Well, I am a lot older than you, and I remember when they were building the Eisenhower highway system.
My point
Can you
exactly.
Imagine?
You're dating yourself, Ellen.
I'm an old bat. What can I say?
But here's the thing, and I have a tax plan as well. You want to help stimulate the economy? Exempt the first $50,000 of income from taxation and have a much more progressive as you go up the ladder. You want to stimulate the economy, you want to create jobs, give people at the bottom who spend all of their money, give them a little bit more, have that reverberation effect across the economy, and it will help. It will help small business. That just seems like common sense to me.
Speaking of smaller people spending their money, Jared Kushner's companies, although he supposedly does not run them anymore, in Baltimore have been sued by two tenants on a class action suit saying that although you're allowed to put a 5% increase if you don't pay your rent on time, you're not allowed to add extra money for court fees, etc. And that's what his companies have done, putting more money in the Kushner company pockets. And so they are being sued on a class action suit.
Now, I mean, they're probably taking a lesson from the banks. Late fee, surcharge, line the pocket a little bit.
Exactly. That's exactly what's going on, for sure.
Just crazy. But did you see, evidently, and I don't know that this is a bad thing, but evidently, Jared's transgender, since I guess in New York, he's registered to vote as a woman?
A female on the voting, but that just may have been a mistake. I cannot make a big deal out of that because, you get these forms, you fill them out quickly, you make mistakes.
Here's the thing. If it's me or if it's some other schlub filling out a form, I'm talking about probably one of the most powerful guys in the country right now. Can't figure out how to fill out we figured out he can't fill out, a form that say if he had meetings with Russians so I guess he's got a problem with forms.
Well, clearly he didn't tell the truth about that.
No, I mean, it just, again, it seems to be, just another one of those things that you just kind of heap onto the pile.
Well, he's clearly not careful. We know that in many ways.
There you go. Anything? I guess today the president finally lifted the Jones Act.
That's right, but he only lifted it for 10 days.
Right.
And we know that 6 of the 15 ports in Puerto Rico are still closed. We know that only 11 hospitals in Puerto Rico have electricity. The president did send down a Navy ship, a hospital ship. However, how are people going to get to that hospital ship if you don't have fuel, et cetera, to get anywhere?
Swim?
Well, I guess so.
No, I mean, look, and my question is, finally, it's about time that he actually did it. What took so long?
That is the question. And as you know, they lifted the Jones Act for places like in Florida, but they didn't lift it for Puerto Rico.
Almost immediately, they lifted it.
Right.
And then that's
crazy.
I don't know. Anyway, are we building the wall? I guess there's some, what, $10 billion for the wall? Is that what the proposal in the House is?
Well, yes, except that now it's moved to $100 billion. And the other thing about it is that if you want to, let's not even talk about people. Let's talk about drugs. And you want to get them through, you're going to build a submarine, you're going to do something like that, and you're not going to pay any attention to the wall. Where there's a will, there's a way, and where there's a lot of money, there's definitely a way.
Yeah, I see. Look, I'm all in favor of building a wall, and not for the reasons that you think. I think we've got to build something. We need people to get back to work. I think it'd be a good stimulus for the Mexican economy because you think Americans are going to go down there and build the wall? So it would be a good stimulus, and it would help the shovel manufacturers and the ladder manufacturers.
Well, perhaps you're right. But the fact is that we're going to build a wall, but it's not going to stop the drugs from coming into the United States, and it may not even stop human beings because they're going to tunnel under the wall, etc.
Of course, we human ingenuity. They're going to figure it out. What we see again. This is one of those simplistic ideas that we try and patch up. It's a silver bullet to fix a much bigger problem, which is inequality, not just here in the U.S., but inequality across the globe.
Well, for sure. And I listen, in that way, I absolutely support what you're saying. But, I mean, really, this wall, and then he originally said Mexico was going to pay for it. But, of course, as you know, Mexico is not going to pay for it.
Well, did anyone really believe that? I mean, I was mocking that back
some
during the
people
campaign.
believed it.
Well, the dim among us, yes, they may have believed it. But any rational, thoughtful person, come on.
Well,
I guess, but what am I talking about?
He claimed a lot of this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, what am I talking about? Our politics isn't rational.
People believed him. Listen, one of the things that he claimed was that he was going to, that he was going to drain the swamp. Well, here we have the HHS secretary, who's a physician, who is using private planes.
Yeah, what about that? Is our government now a private charter institution? I mean, you've got even Scott Pruitt's even got and his own personalized phone booth, plus the flights. Mnuchin, getting to go up and see I didn't get to see the eclipse. Why should he get to?
Well, what's interesting about Mnuchin is a person at the White House emailed me that his wife got on the plane with a $10,000 purse. So I looked up the name of the purse. It's about almost $20,000, and the same manufacturer goes up to purses up to $98,000.
If you buy a $90,000 purse, someone should steal it from you.
All I think about is my people, what the $90,000 can do for my people who need it in South Sudan with the goats.
It's like that guy who went to jail. What was his name? Kozlowski, or what was his name? The TRW guy. Not TRW, the Tyco guy, who had the $16,000 shower curtain and the $5,000 umbrella holder.
Oh my gosh! What is wrong with people?
Fortunately, he went to jail, but I'll have to look that up because I've forgotten. But again, there's just this kind of obscene wealth and wasting of resource that could be used, I would argue, in a much better way.
For absolutely sure.
Yeah. Anything else going on today? Since any NFL stuff? I mean, we got to get some kneeling in, right?
Got
to bash the kneelers.
Bob Ney has talked about the kneelers and the standers, and he says he doesn't care about them. What he cares about is, are they giving any money to the hurricane? And I think that's a very valid question.
Yeah, good point. Good question. Ellen, I always appreciate it. Great talking with you.
Thank you.
Our good friend Ellen Ratner, Talk Media News. I mean, $90,000 for a purse? Really? Really? Just a little bag? I'm going shopping. No, you're not. No, you're not. Look, that's more than the vast majority of people in this country make an entire year, and she's probably got 10 of them. I mean, this is the kind of thing that, when you're talking about tax time and this kind of argument, that's, to me, the kind of stuff that we should be pointing out. Look, these are folks who can afford a $90,000 purse. They can afford to pay a touch more in taxes to make sure that we get infrastructure, education for our kids, health care. Mind-blowing. I know, Rick. I get it. Someone had to make that purse. Yeah, some child in China making poverty wages. Got it. Right there. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you have a $90,000 purse? Would you ever buy a $90,000 purse? Oh, there's that. My wife doesn't even carry a purse. Quick break. Right back.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. The California Nurses Association, National Nurses United, is mounting a major door-to-door campaign in October throughout the state of California in a push for a state Medicare for All bill. SB 562 was passed by the state Senate but blocked from a vote in the state Assembly by Democrat Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon. Martha Kuhl is Secretary-Treasurer of National Nurses United.
The Healthy California campaign is going to be in every district, 80 Assembly districts in California, to knock on every door in those districts to talk to people about guaranteeing health care to everyone in California. What nurses in California, what California Nurses Associations want, and what the Healthy California campaign wants is for the bill to be released early next year at the first opportunity in the legislature and move forward so that we can guarantee health care for all Californians.
Democrats have big majorities in the California state legislature, and Democrat Jerry Brown is governor. So if the Democratic Party supports Medicare for All, guaranteed health care, they could make it happen in California. But California Assembly Speaker Rendon is blocking it. Kuhl says, though, that the people of California have the power to make this happen.
People in our community are aware that our Democratic legislature is holding up the right to health care in California. We need them to understand that this is possible and that we need them to get involved in the campaign and to understand the idea that they have a right to health care and that there is a way to get there.
IBEW Local 98 says it's preparing to file suit against drug companies joining litigation against opioid makers. IBEW Local 98 business manager John Doherty says that IBEW Local 98 will no longer allow the manufacturers and marketers of these deadly drugs to peddle their poison to our members without facing severe consequences. He says he's seen too many IBEW members lose their lives to opioids. Doherty says that opioid addiction is a national epidemic and Big Pharma has to be held accountable as opioid manufacturers and marketers. WIN is America's multimedia news voice for workers.
These kind of gazillionaires, they don't want regular folks to have a voice. And they don't want teachers to have a voice. They don't want workers to have a voice.
Support WIN's worker news mission at workersindependentnews.com.
Let's get America working. We must build, maintain, and repair our nation's crumbling infrastructure. Teamsters support a bipartisan approach to creating good jobs for American workers. Learn more at letsgetAmericaWorking.com. Teamsters strong, America stronger.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
Exposing GOP hypocrisy. The Rick Smith Show.
Tax time. You know it's time to start. Scholar over at the Institute for Policy Studies, also editor of inequality.org, a fantastic resource, and the author of Born on Third Base. Chuck, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, great to be with you.
So here we are. It's the Hunger Games, Chuck. Mine. Screw you.
It's like I call it the big money grab. You know, it's like, but the packaging is the sort of same old, look, we're going to give these corporations tax cuts and you're going to get a job. Well, that's sort of been discredited. You know, we're going to give wealthy individuals tax cuts, and that'll unleash growth and investment. It's kind of like the trickle-down tax zombies have risen from the dead, and they're going to walk around saying the same thing, except 40 years later, now hopefully we've caught on, you know?
I hope so. Look, I mean, we've had $20 trillion of experiment to where we've created a massive debt. And I look at the scheme again, as you pointed out, this is the zombie. They keep selling the same snake oil, so, you know, basically hoping if we do it enough, it might work this time.
No, it's you know, we actually know, though. We actually have a lot of data, you know, that shows if, you know, we looked at the tax cut data where all these corporations got reduced taxes because they're global and then they use the offshore system. What did they do with that extra money? They pay their CEOs more, they buy back stock prices and pay dividends to their investors, and they lay off workers. It actually is not a recipe. If the tax cut was actually targeted to working people, so people had more money in their pocket that they could spend in the local economy, that would actually have a benefit for the economy.
Absolutely.
But the trickle-down stuff is just completely, there's no evidence anymore.
Which is why I've said that what we need to do is and Democrats, if you're listening, you know, you need a plan. I say you exempt the first $50,000 from taxation so that families can you know, have money in their pocket, disposable income, put shoes on the kids, buy something for the kitchen table. I don't know, maybe see a movie occasionally, but that first bit shouldn't be taxed at all. And then we have a much more progressive, higher tax rate as you go up. And look, I don't want to punish people for doing well, but the reality is we've got people who are doing really well and people who are doing really badly.
No, and that's where you know, this Patriotic Millionaires Network is really important. These are the people at the top who would pay, you know,
they're the ones who
get
won
these tax cuts, and they're saying, look, don't cut the estate tax. That's an all-American tax. Don't reduce top tax rates. Yeah, do what your proposal, which is raise the floor, exempt more people. People are already paying a lot of state and local taxes, sales taxes, and other taxes. The federal tax should be the place where, you know, working people are paying a little bit less, and it's more progressive because it offsets the fact that the overall tax system is not progressive, and most state and local taxes hit working people much harder.
Yeah, I have an uncle who's fairly well off. He's done really well for himself in business, and he said, "Look, I say we cut taxes on on the people at the bottom, give them all the money because eventually I'm going to get it all anyway."
That's right. You know, that's the longer view. I mean, if you have a middle out or bottom up sort of theory of economic growth, as opposed to this bankrupt idea that we're just going to keep shoveling advantages to the top and somehow that's going to benefit everyone. And that's been our experiment now for 40 years. How's that working for us?
It's not. And you know,
stagnant wages for 40 years?
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing this and it just hasn't worked. I had a guy on the show a couple of years ago who's a fairly well-to-do businessman. He said, "Look, if you give me a tax cut, I'm going to go on vacation. If you send someone in my door to buy my products, I'm going to hire somebody to take care of that demand." That's common sense.
It is. You know, Trump yesterday was in Indiana, and he had a farmer that he had picked out to stand with him to talk about the travails of the death tax, the estate tax, why it's bad for farmers, just like you said at the outset of the show. You know, where is that farmer? So Trump brought his farmer. So I woke up in the morning and I looked up, who is this guy? His name is Kip Tom. He owns 20,000 acres over 7 counties in Indiana, and he's gotten $3.3 million in taxpayer-funded farm subsidies in the last decade. And I'm thinking, really? He's getting up and complaining about having to pay a tax that he probably won't have to pay? He's going to be Trump's example of the beleaguered farmer who's going to be put out of business?
Is it too much to say that shouldn't be called subsidies? I mean, because if we're subsidizing a single mother putting food on the table, we call that welfare.
It's essentially saying we're writing checks. He's cashing $3.3 million in checks. And I'm not, all opposed to farm subsidies. There are situations, that some of them go to promote good conservation practices. Some of them keep up the price of help offset the lowering of commodity prices, but most of those subsidies go to the biggest operations. It's just like the tax cuts that are being proposed. Most of those farm subsidies go to the top 10% of farmers. Half the farmers in this country don't get any farm subsidies. But here it's just that idea, like, I'm going to complain about taxes, but I'm very happy to take you and me, the rest of us, chipping in and sending him checks. And I think that takes a little hubris.
Well, again, I think it comes back to this frame, Chuck, that I'm a producer, I'm one of the makers, and you over there, and it's the words that we use. And the reason I asked about the subsidy and the welfare is because then you look at it and say, well, I'm making and I'm producing but you're a taker and you're a parasite. And what you are getting, we shouldn't be doing.
Yeah. What a good society does is it says, look, yeah, we help people. Sometimes government is involved in the business of encouraging, stimulating, helping people who have hit bottom. There's no shame in that. Nope. That's what a good society does. What's deceptive is to just pretend like my subsidy is because I'm a hard worker. My farm subsidy is virtuous, and your subsidy is you're a taker and a welfare cheat or something. It's like, let's be honest here. That's what societies do.
Yep. No. And look, I'm a big supporter of loopholes, and I get a lot of flack for this. But I believe that if you have a tax rate high enough to support them, it's good policy to incentivize certain behaviors. Do we want solar power? Absolutely. We need to help jumpstart that along. We want kids to get education. We want health care. We want libraries, public schools. Go down the list of things that we want people to invest in. I'm all in favor of creating areas to get tax breaks and loopholes or whatever you want to call them to incentivize good behavior.
Yeah, no, and I'm with you on that. In fact, as someone who grew up in a wealthy family, I can look back and see the ways in which government support at different points along the way made it possible for people in my family. After World War II, a 1% 40-year fixed-rate mortgage helped one of my relatives buy a farm. 1% 40-year fixed-rate mortgage got that family on the wealth-building train, and there's no shame in that, what we should do is say we shouldn't pretend like some people did it on their own, and what's the matter with you? When in fact a lot of the middle class in this country was built in part because we made some very targeted public investments in education and housing and infrastructure that lifted up millions of people. Yeah. And now we're pulling the rug out.
Let me ask you about this. Let's get to the tax plan, because I know this is, the Wall Street Journal has called it an outline. The Times called it something of a plan. It's not like a lot of what the Trump administration has done. Not really light on the details, heavy on the rhetoric. What are your thoughts of this? Is this more of the same bad Republican policy? Is there anything good in this, do you think?
Well, it is what they call a framework, and actually, there's one part that you and I think would like, which is this idea of you're doubling the exemptions. So that does raise the number of households at the bottom. It raises the amount of money you have to earn before you have to start to pay taxes. So that is a progressive feature of this. It knocks the top tax rate down for corporations from 35% down to 20%. But here's the reality, the effective tax rate. This is the thing we should always be looking at. What is it that corporations are actually paying? Right now they're paying 14 or 15%. And there's some companies, some of the biggest companies like Apple and General Electric, they're paying nothing. They're paying 0 or 1%, Boeing 1%.
Or actually, we're paying them.
Or we're paying them. You can go lower than 0. We can just hand cash to corporations. So those companies, they can't do any better than they are now unless we simply are just writing them checks, which is maybe what they want. But anyway, so that corporate tax rate, and it comes back to, this isn't, they're going to sell it as jobs. They're going to say, this is good for you, Joe and Jane, middle class. This is going to be, but that's just not the evidence.
I did want to ask you about one thing, and before I let you go, because we hear a lot about this carried interest loophole that's out there, and I know this is going to be where people start to snore, but because this is complicated stuff. I know Mnuchin back in August said that we're gonna close that, and then we're not going to close that. Did they come close to closing it?
I don't think so. No, they kind of steered clear of dealing with some of the distortions around capital gains taxes. It would be interesting to see when they come forward with more details if they really do try to close that, well, I call it the hedge fund billionaire loophole. Trump has said he's opposed to it. It might be a rhetorical point. It doesn't raise that much revenue, but it's sort of a great example of sort of the corruption of the tax code. So whether they deal with that or not, we don't know yet.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just another one of those things, like repatriation, like the alternative minimum tax, that seems to be for a select few.
Yeah, that's right.
And that, again, costs the rest of us. Chuck, I appreciate the time. Great talking with you.
Great talking to you. Be in touch.
As always, good talking to Chuck Collins. He's one of the patriotic billionaires, also a senior scholar over at the Institute for Policy Studies, editor over at inequality.org. Fantastic work that they do. Also the author of Born on Third Base. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
For jobs in Steel Town, for the working and poor. From Wall Street to Main Street, to the yet to be named street. Child connect the dots and see we all live on the same street.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Would you be willing to stand up in solidarity with your fellow workers, even if it cost you your job? Well, on this day in labor history, the workers at Mersey Docks and Harbour Company in Liverpool, England, answered that question. The year was 1995. 329 Mersey dock workers refused to cross a picket line that was being walked against another company on the docks. The workers at Torside had been fired for protesting against erosions in job security and increasingly unpredictable scheduling. They were speaking out against the casualization of their labor. When the Mersey dock workers would not cross the Torside picket line, they too were fired. Dock workers across the world stood up in solidarity with the Mersey workers against this unjust treatment. They knew if it could happen in Liverpool, it might happen anywhere. Pickets sprung up from Norway to Japan, from Australia to Italy, and into the United States. It was a global outpouring of solidarity. The strike wore on for 850 days. 1 year into the strike, dock workers held an international day of action in support of the Liverpool workers. Finally, 2.5 years after they were fired, the dock workers agreed to a settlement. They did not get their jobs back, but they did get severance pay. A film was made about the struggle. The proceeds were used to purchase a bar in Liverpool. It is known as the Dockers Pub and has become a space for working class organizing. The International Dock Workers Council was also born from this strike. Today, the council has 90,000 members, a lasting movement of solidarity. 20 years after the strike, dock workers from across the world gathered in Liverpool to remember the struggle. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happen!
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So the Equifax thing, 143 million of us, our data, who knows where, who knows who's going to steal from us or steal our identity. One thing I do know is Richard Smith, and again, we don't share the same name. He's the third Equifax executive to retire. And I love how they get to retire instead of being fired. He's going to collect, jeez, oh man. He's going to collect as much as $90 million on the way out the door. Some of it is retirement. Some of it is the income that he would have collected as part of his salary. His salary, almost $1.5 million. He's going to collect that, plus another almost $18 million over the next couple of years, according to Forbes magazine or Fortune magazine. I mean, you look at this. Potentially, this guy who should be fired, going to end up with more than $90 million. And you look at these golden parachutes that come out when you have these disgraced CEOs. And I think of the guy from Home Depot who, Home Depot threw him out $210 million he walked away with. And I'm going, how do I get fired like that? Can someone fire me and hand me a check for $210 million? When I've been fired, no one gave me 210 pennies, let alone $210 million. And then immediately he goes and he got a job, I think it was with GM. So, in the shuffling of CEOs, he didn't get hurt at all. He just ended up walking away with a whole boatload of money. And you look at the Yahoo, former, the head woman there. She walked away with something like $109 million golden parachute. And you just go down the list of all of these, just horrible scenarios where you get these people who just, they screwed up royally. They horrible on the job. And yet they're rewarded. And rewarded in the tax code as well, because, well, we don't consider, that stuff as income. The stock options aren't income. Only you working people, only you people who get up and punch our clock and do our work and all of that, you're the ones. I mean, it's really quite remarkable if you think about it. It's quite remarkable what we've allowed to happen in this country. And, when you start talking about taxes and you start talking about, this scheme that they're putting in front of us, I think we already all know. We do. We all know how this movie is going to end. It's going to end with us, paying higher fees to the state governments, getting less from our government, an infrastructure that's not going to keep up with demographic growth and not keep up with shifting of populations and densities. Where I live, when I first moved here, a little over, I guess it's been a little over 12 years now. When we first moved here, it was like it was kind of a Sleepy Hollow kind of place. Traffic wasn't really bad except for a couple of times. During the main rush hour, you'd have to wait for a minute or two at a light. Now things are backed up and clogging. And you watch the transition of the area in which I live now, and I talk to people all over the place who they're seeing the same thing. Congestion's getting worse, and our infrastructure is getting more outdated, and no one is really considering how the future. What happened to our statesmen? What happened to the visionary leaders who said, you know what, we need a highway system to get people around, to get goods around, to they sold it as to get missiles and bombs around, but still to get things around, to connect the country. Where are those visionary leaders? What we've got now is we got a bunch of people going, hooray for me, ship's going down, got to get mine, screw the rest of you. This tax plan is basically screw the rest of you. If you haven't figured it out, if you need a bumper sticker, this is it. Hooray for me, screw the rest of you. I'm going to get mine. And again, we've seen this movie over and over and over again. And what it's going to do, and we know this, it's going to explode our debt and our deficits. In 4 years, we're going to look down the road if this passes, and I hope it does not. We're going to look back at it and go, well, now we're pushing $30 trillion in debt. Now we're in real serious trouble because, we had the Republicans back there in 2017 going, no, we can have cake and eat it too. It'll be wonderful. We'll cut all the taxes and money will flow in. Because think about what Chuck Collins said. Think about what he said about corporate taxes. They're going to cut it down to 20%, right? Going to cut it down from 35 to 20%. The effective tax rate in this country already is 14%. So already we know that move doesn't matter. What it's going to do, understand this, what it's going to do is it's going to help corporations lay off some attorneys who do some tax avoidance stuff because, well, they're already at 14%. It's really mind-blowing. And look, we don't have all the details because, these aren't detail people. Evidently, the Donald's not a detail guy. He's a big picture guy. He's a thinker. I'm sorry. That was actually kind of, I find that funny. This big picture framework, again, we've seen this. And we know what it's going to get. And this idea, does anybody buy the frame that if you give the wealthy a boatload of money, they're going to create jobs? Does anyone buy that anymore? Look, there are only so many $90,000 purses you can buy. And there are only so many that can be produced. And I got to be honest, I would rather have, 10,000 people buying $9 purses than one person buying a $90,000 purse. That's how you stimulate the economy. And look, I know my environmental friends are going, no, that's bad. It's bad for the economy and bad for the environment and all that. We're a consumer-based economy. People need jobs by producing things. And you need to have consumers who have money. Does this sound like common sense? Because I keep having people tell me that somehow this trickle-down thing is going to work. If we just do it enough, if we just cut enough spending, if we just do it enough, it's going to work. If we just give more, if we just tighten the belt that one notch more, it's going to work. Sorry, it's not, and we know that. So how do we get away from what we know this is going to turn into, which is the Hunger Games, which is I'm going to get a small little penny, I'm going to get a little bit, just as long as the person behind me gets less. How do we do that? And where are the Democrats? Where's their plan? As I've said, I think a good first start is you exempt the first $50,000 in income. And anyone over $20,000, you increase the earned income tax credit to make sure that that people have buying power. Is that going to happen? We'll see. We'll see what the framework says. We're going to get into the details. So get your pillow, get the little nightcap, or shoot up with some caffeine or something, because we're going to get into the ins and outs, the minutia of the tax plan here in a second, with Seth Hanlon from the Center for American Progress. Quick break. Right back.
Own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
Almost a week after Maria hit, some isolated towns still have not been heard from at all.
Calls grow to accelerate disaster aid for Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. Adding danger to desperation, major Puerto Rican dam at risk of total failure. Good news and bad from toxic Superfund sites flooded by Hurricane Harvey in Texas. Plus,
the oceans of 2017 are on track to be the third warmest on record.
Unusually warm oceans fueling record Atlantic storm season.
All of those record disasters and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Look, climate change is real. 99% of scientists know it's real. The whole world knows it's real, except for maybe one person in the White House.
Shh, don't tell him. He's got bigger things to worry about. People are kneeling while the national anthem is playing. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, we are now more than a week since Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico, and things are getting worse there by the moment.
Yes. Now, some disaster aid has finally begun to arrive in Puerto Rico, where the wrath of Hurricane Maria caused catastrophic damage across the entire island's electricity, communications, water, and sewage infrastructure. Worse, the island is now in the midst of a record-breaking heat wave. Conditions are becoming desperate in some areas, according to Puerto Rico's Governor Ricardo Rosselló, who, in an interview with PBS NewsHour, called on Congress to move more quickly.
The magnitude of this catastrophe is enormous. This is going to take a lot of help, a lot of collaboration. We are in the midst of potentially having a humanitarian crisis here in Puerto Rico, which would translate into a humanitarian crisis in the United States. So I call upon Congress to take action immediately. Puerto Ricans are proud U.S. citizens.
They are proud U.S. citizens. I can't imagine the government, the president, taking this long to take action had this been a city in the mainland U.S.
Yes. Now, Republican House Speaker Paul Ryan said on Monday that Congress likely won't be taking up another disaster relief bill until mid-October.
Oh, take your time. What's the rush, Speaker Ryan?
Congressional Democratic leaders have called for the U.S. military to launch a large-scale recovery effort. And New York Governor Andrew Cuomo on Sunday said that in response to a direct request for state-to-state assistance from Puerto Rico's Governor Rosselló, he is now sending New York's emergency recovery teams supplies and is launching a donation fund.
Instead of arguing with football players, instead of obsessing about how to take health care from the poor in this country, why don't we put the politics aside and focus on helping Americans in desperate need? And those are the people of Puerto Rico.
Tens of thousands have been evacuated from below the Oaxaca Dam in northwestern Puerto Rico, where flooding from Hurricane Maria has spilled over the dam, causing flash flooding downstream and is eroding its base. As we go to air, however, the dam itself is still intact. A further blow to Puerto Rico's economy and its future food supply. According to an initial assessment, the storm decimated at least 80% of this year's crops in Puerto Rico, and agriculture experts warn that damage to the soil, water, and infrastructure is so extensive that farmers may not be able to plant crops next year either.
What's going on in Puerto Rico is extraordinary. The president tweeted finally about Puerto Rico on Monday night as if to say, hey, too bad, Puerto Rico. Florida and Texas are doing great, but you guys were a mess to start with, so there's not much we can do to help you. It's frankly appalling and could well turn out to be Donald Trump's Hurricane Katrina at this rate.
And the corporate TV news media's Sunday news shows are also failing Puerto Rico. A new analysis by Media Matters finds that the 5 network Sunday talk shows devoted less than 1 minute combined to the U.S. territory's devastation. Meanwhile, in Houston, good news and bad news. The good news is that the EPA says it has removed more than 500 containers of, quote, potentially hazardous material from toxic Superfund sites that were flooded by Hurricane Harvey. But the bad news is, AP reports the agency won't reveal what the hazardous materials are, which sites they came from, or whether there was or is any threat to human health.
Unbelievable.
Finally, the oceans in 2017 are on track to be the third warmest ever recorded. Climate scientist Katherine Hayhoe, in an interview with 60 Minutes, said it will take time to determine the exact contribution of global warming to this latest round of disastrous hurricanes, but there are some things that scientists do know.
We can say absolutely without a doubt that this hurricane took place over altered background conditions. Our planet is very different today than it would have been 50 or 100 years ago.
It is, and the price that scientists like Katherine Hayhoe have been warning about is one that it looks like we are really beginning to pay. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Baby, if I could change the world.
The man who sends the investor class diving for their tax shelters. Vic Smith.
Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So I'm not going to call this, really a plan. It's kind of, I think the Wall Street Journal had it right. It's kind of an outline, kind of a top kind of idea thing, top of ideas. Not much into the details, but again, as I've been saying, what we know is we've seen this kind of movie before. We know that the very well-to-do are going to do very well. We know everyone else, probably not so much. And one of my favorite quotes was written by our next guest. In his piece, Trump's reform plan is about cutting taxes for Trump. He writes, Trump is not unrigging the tax code for you. He's trying to rig the tax code for Donald Trump and give himself a huge tax cut. Seth Handlin, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So let me ask you, Donald is saying, look, I'm not cutting my own taxes. I'm not. I'm getting nothing out of this, Seth.
I mean, it's the latest in a long line of just utter whoppers. Mexico's going to pay for the wall. We're not cutting Medicaid. Your premiums are going down. I mean, what can you say about it? It's not even close to resembling the truth. It's what we have come to expect from Trump, of course. And, I mean, it's just nuts. And, I would sort of challenge what you said. I mean, it's certainly not a fully framed, it's not a tax bill, it's not a fully framed legislative proposal, but it is a plan to cut taxes for corporations, to cut the highest, they're very specific about what the corporate rate is going to come down to, what the top individual rate is going to come down to, then this new loophole for people like Donald Trump. They're very specific about the rates. What they're not specific about is who's going to pay for all this and what the impact is going to be on working families.
Now, the numbers that I've seen, this will add, it's not paid for, to use the, go back to the Obama years and everything had to be paid for, and there had to be offsets and all of that stuff. The tax cut is very large, over $5 trillion. And there's like a $2.2 trillion, we don't know where it's coming from kind of thing, right?
Right. So I think what's happening, so that basically if you list all the tax cuts, almost all of which go to high-income people and corporations, they come to about $5 or $6 trillion over 10 years, and then they do identify, offsetting provisions. So deductions that they're taking away, and those things raise about $3 trillion. So on net, the plan, as estimated by one group, I think pretty conservatively, costs $2.2 trillion on net over 10 years, and then if you add the interest, because if we have to borrow that, add to the deficit, we'd be paying interest on that, and so the interest would come to $2.7 trillion over 10 years.
And that goes to right on the, everyone's screaming about $20 trillion in debt, Seth. So this would be added to that?
Exactly. And I mean, this is like this is the party that had been screaming about deficits all during the Obama years. For 8 years, saying the national debt was our greatest problem, our country's greatest problem, that we were facing a fiscal crisis, right around the corner, that we were borrowing so much that we were going to turn into Greece. And now, several months after Obama leaves office, they're proposing to add $2.7 trillion to the debt.
Now, you're the smart guy who, this is what you do. This is your world. Most people, when you start talking about tax policy, they kind of doze off and, wander or look out the window or whatever. But this is what you do. Is there any way possible, any way, shape, or form that the idea that if we just give more and more and more to corporations, if we cut their tax rates, cut tax rates for the very wealthy, all of that, that somehow that will ever trickle down and create jobs and be the utopia we're told it to be?
I mean, it certainly hasn't happened in the past, and I think there's lots of reasons why there's less reason to believe that now. I mean, we have, corporate America is very concentrated, and workers have less bargaining power than they did in the past. And so if you give corporations a tax cut, all you're doing is giving them more cash at the end of the day, and they already have, are sitting on record levels of profits and record levels of cash. So there's just little reason to believe now, even compared to in the past, that they're going to use that cash to invest in, hiring workers or boosting workers' wages or, buying machinery even, which would improve productivity of workers. So, what we're looking at here is just a windfall for corporations. And then, of course, there's taxes that are just pure, tax cuts that are just pure windfalls and loopholes for, like eliminating estate tax and creating a new loophole for non-corporate businesses that benefits people like Donald Trump.
Now, one of the things I want to ask you about, because you brought up the corporate tax rate, because a little bit ago we talked with Chuck Collins about this issue in particular, about dropping it from 35%, which is the highest in the whole world, we're told, down to 20%. But as Chuck pointed out, the effective tax rate in this country is about 14%. How's this going to help business? How's it going to help us? I mean, does it do anything then?
I mean, at the end of the day, no, it's just a windfall. I mean, there's different estimates of what corporations actually pay, but all of them are, around, even in the lower mid-20s or the highest ones you see. So, and I think just if you sort of look historically, corporate after-tax profits are the highest that they've ever been. So if the problem was that corporations' after-tax profits are not high enough, they would be investing already, and they're not. And so we're increasingly seeing corporations paying out what profits they earn in dividends and stock buybacks instead of investing, which shows that there's something wrong with the markets. We have to deal with these problems. We have to get corporations to invest, but it also suggests that giving corporations an additional tax break is not the way to accomplish that.
Now, I would argue that by giving them more tax breaks, that what we've done is we've allowed them to invest elsewhere.
Right, and so one of the elements of this plan is to reduce the tax rate on foreign profits. So if you're a U.S. multinational corporation, the profits that you earn overseas now under the current code, they're sort of theoretically taxed. They're taxed when they bring profits home.
If they
but
bring
there
it
is
home.
if they bring it home, and so by and large they don't bring it home, right? So, but there is that backstop that they know that if they're going to earn income overseas or artificially move income overseas, they're going to have to pay the tax eventually. And under the Trump plan, he eliminates tax on those foreign earnings altogether, and so. Which is actually a flip-flop from his campaign position. In his campaign position, during the campaign, he said we're going to tax foreign profits and domestic profits the same. And now foreign profits are going to be completely exempted. So if you're a corporation looking at a zero tax rate on investment abroad versus even a 20, even if we're cutting it here to 20%, there's still a huge gap. So that's going to possibly disadvantage American workers by moving investment overseas, and one thing that it'll almost surely do is move more profits overseas on paper to these tax haven countries.
Right, and the highlight, folks here in Pennsylvania, we have the Delaware loophole where corporations
Right.
incorporate in Delaware and they scrub all their profits. So what you're saying is we're setting up a global situation where the tax rate for corporations may not even matter because they might be able to just whitewash all of their profits somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at this in a recent paper, and so in 2013, it turns out 2012 and 2013, more than half of the profits that American corporations are reporting elsewhere in the world, so in other words, outside the United States, they say that they're earning in just seven countries that are essentially tax havens. They're very small, tiny countries, so Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, Singapore, and they say that they earn more than half of their profits there, and as opposed to countries like Germany, France, China, Japan, and they pay on average about 2 or 3% tax on those profits. So right now, so our system is clearly broken, right? Like, so that allows them to do that. But right now, as I mentioned, they need to. There is that backstep where they would have to pay tax if they brought that, if they quote unquote repatriated those earnings,
right.
And Trump's getting rid of that.
No, I'm listening to this, and I'm going, "Where's my pitchfork?" Because this is one of those moments where you go, "Really? This is how bad it is." Look, I believe you pay your taxes, you go to work, you work hard, you play by the rules, you do all this stuff. But when you hear how badly the game has been rigged, especially against the people who are busting their behind to make it to tomorrow, it's infuriating.
Yeah, this is really bad, and it's coming on the heels of the Medicaid, the Trump care, right? So I think the important thing for people to understand is that this is like two sides of the same coin, right? They tried to cut Medicaid to give tax cuts to the very rich, right? And then they couldn't get the votes for that. I mean, there was there definitely the grassroots activism and people speaking out and going to town halls stopped that, right? We've been able to stop the Trump care bill so far. And they got they got 49 votes, and they got 40 some odd votes before they realized they didn't have 50 just last week.
Right.
So now they're moving on to cutting taxes, right? And so we're going through this cycle where now they're going to cut taxes by more than $2 trillion, put that on the debt, and then come back next year or even sooner and say, well, because of deficits, we have to cut health care. So this is all the same fight, even though the legislative fight that we're going into is just about taxes, literally just about taxes. It's also about whether we're going to be able to pay for things like providing affordable health care.
Oh, it's really about allowing them to create the next crisis, as you've pointed out, that they're going to use against us. And the thing is this is the MO. I mean, this is predictable. It's what the Republicans have done and have gotten away with. And you look at, and look, I've got friends who go, we're $20 trillion in debt, Rick. Don't you know that? And I go, yeah, this is how we got there.
Yep. And the Bush tax cuts are responsible for a good chunk of that, like something like. So first of all, the debt's about 14 trillion. So they use this figure of 20 trillion, but that includes money the government owes itself. So
right.
I think the better figure is 14 trillion, but obviously that's still a big number. But something like a third of that is purely because of the Bush tax cuts, and then obviously there's other causes too. But yeah.
So let me ask you the other side of this, because there's got to be something that gives him the ability to say this is going to help middle class families. There's got to be some nugget. There's got to be something that makes someone go, oh, there's something in it for me. Is there anything in this for working people, for working families? Anything that you say is a good thing?
So I think basically there's like mystery meat, right, for working families. So we just don't know.
All right.
And the reason for that is because the tax when you calculate your taxes, obviously there's many moving parts. There's your income, how your income's calculated, what deductions you have, what exemptions you have, and then at the end of the day, what the rates are, and then what the credits are. So there's all these moving parts. They haven't really told us anything. The one, they claim that they're doubling the standard deduction, right? So all things being equal, that is definitely a benefit to people, and there's no doubt that's a substantial benefit to a lot of people. The problem is, at the same time, so first of all, they're not doubling it, they're almost doubling it. But then at the same time, they're taking away personal and dependent exemptions. And so for a family of 3, that's basically about a wash. Like if you're claiming the standard deduction, it's kind of a wash. Family of 4 or more actually loses out from that trade-off. Like you're losing more in personal exemptions than you are gaining in this new standard deduction. So, but then, then again, they're going to say, well, maybe we'll increase the child tax credit, but they don't say how much. And then they say, we'll cut most of the rates, but they're actually increasing the bottom rate. And they also aren't telling us what the tax brackets are, so we really have no idea. So, I think at the end of the day, the information that we got yesterday really gives regular families almost no sense of how this tax plan will affect them directly. And I think the only thing we can know for sure is that it gives $5 trillion of gross tax cuts to corporations and to very wealthy people that eventually, sooner or later, whether it's through higher deficits or through tax increases now, are going to have to be paid for.
Infuriating. Any chance of this going through? Like, I know the president has said that they're working with Democrats. Is there any chance that Democrats sign on to this and this becomes something like this? Because I know we don't know the details yet, and I guess the Donald's not a details guy. Any chance that you see this going through by the end of the year?
I doubt by the end of the year. I think there's definitely a fair likelihood that it does go through, just because on a partisan basis, just because Republicans are divided on a lot of issues, and obviously like healthcare is a hard one for them. But the one thing that tends to unite them is tax cuts.
Right.
I think their biggest obstacle. So they have to get a budget first and what happens is the budget then fast tracks the process that they're going to pass tax cuts, and that's important because then they can exclude Democrats in that process. So they're going to need to get 50 votes on a budget, and I think the key is, are there any deficit hawks left in the Republican Party who are going to say, we just spent the last 8 years yelling and screaming about higher deficits. Let's do tax reform that doesn't add to the deficit and insist on that. So again, it comes down to whether there's 3 Republican senators who are willing to stand up and take that stand. Senator Toomey is almost certainly not going to be one of them.
No, absolutely not. There's a guy who thinks nothing should be taxed.
Yeah,
it's just crazy. But it's going to give us stuff to watch as this goes down the road. Seth, I'd love to have you back and keep us informed on what's going on.
Always good. Always fun talking. Rick.
Great. Thanks so much, Seth Hanlon, Senior Fellow there at the Center for American Progress. You want to check out his piece? We got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Seth's name, take you right there. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show.
They laid their future plans. They saw the food was everything to man. And maybe then they had a thought, help the poorest folks, but it only brought more money to their hands. And the poor keep getting poorer. People turn away, not able to admit the way they planned. It's taking all the soul away from everything they grew. They can't have the lake on which to stand.
Uncovering the con and conservatism. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1904. A woman was arrested for smoking a cigarette in a car on Fifth Avenue in New York City. While women in the United States are no longer likely to be arrested for smoking cigarettes in public, they continue to face unequal treatment in the labor force. When women started working in factories in the mid-1800s, most notably textile mills, owners paid them far less than men for similar labor. In fact, it was because they saw women as a cheap labor pool that many textile factory owners favored female workers. Today, a woman will earn about 80 cents for every dollar a man earns. Even though women have increased their presence in higher paying jobs traditionally dominated by men, women as a whole continue to work in low paying occupations. Women are about twice as likely as men to say that they've been discriminated against at work because of their gender. In January of 2009, President Barack Obama signed into law the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. It was named after a woman who fought for 10 years against gender pay discrimination at the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. She was awarded a $3 million jury settlement, but that ruling was later overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. The 2009 Act strengthened women's ability to seek legal recourse over pay discrimination. Still, today, the rate of women's compensation lags behind that of men. Labor unions must continue to play a role in fighting against pay inequity.
This union maid was wise to the tricks of the company spies. She'd never be fooled by a company stool. She'd always organize the guys. She'd always get her way. When she asked for better pay, she'd show her.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Oh, you can't scare me. I'm sticking to the union.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Fascist, you may
Show. Check out our website, ricksmithshow.com. So while there's a lot of talk about Facebook and the Russian trolls and all of the fake news, turns out the Twitters also were, under assault, as Oxford University released a research bit today pointing out that millions of tweets were flying all over the place in the final days of the 2016 election, and in places like Pennsylvania, and places like Michigan, and places like Florida, and the battleground states, where you can target some of your tweets. You can have these bots, and look, I get tons of this stuff all the time. Where you see someone's, John 4 7 16 10 5 3 8 9 A, and you go, no one creates a handle like that. They're generated, and you see this stuff just being constantly shared and liked, and this whole little incestuous pool of all of this stuff. And look, I've been saying for a long time, if Donald Trump truly wanted to be a great president, he could have been right from the start. He could have come out right at the very beginning and said, look, the Electoral College declared me the winner. We had a hard-fought campaign. We slugged it out. Is what it is. There is some things that we need to look into. As a country, we need to know if the Russians, if a foreign power had anything to do with meddling in our elections, and we are going to get to the bottom of this. I am president of the United States. It is my job to make sure that the integrity of that ballot box is upheld. Now, taking the mantle of I am president, I am the leader, I am going to lead, and we are going to get to the bottom of this. I don't think there's an investigation. I don't think there's any Mueller. I don't think there's any talk of collusion. Come out and say, look, I don't know if there was any attempt to entice our campaign. I don't know if there was any attempt to entice the Clinton campaign. What I know is there's a lot of allegations, and we are going to dig to the bottom of it. We're going to let the chips fall where they may. And in that, you have the ability to then go, look, there was a lot of, and I was saying this during the campaign, there were so many bits of nonsense being thrown at us. And we find out that, over this past weekend, even the Russian trolls were on both sides of the kneeling issue, just trying to gin up trouble, just trying to get people all worked up and in a frenzy, keep throwing out the most outrageous stuff that they can think of. Look, we don't need Russian trolls to do that. My Twitter feed is full of all of that. But the fact that they're investing resource into doing more, into causing more disruption. And what's interesting is, in this Mother Jones piece that I read a little bit ago, they point out that Germany, with their elections recently, had kind of the same thing. There was an attempt to do it. But what they found is that, the Germans didn't bite as hard as we did. And, they said, maybe it has to do with the fact that, look, a lot of attention's been paid to what's going on here in the U.S. Or maybe they're just a little bit more involved in their political process. I don't know. But the hope is the more we talk about this, the more we point it out, the more we expose it, maybe the less effective it's going to be next time around. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. Love to hear your thoughts. Tax good? I want to hear. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at the Rick